Hi, I'm Mark Hamandoud, and we've just finished the part one of God's creation account, which we only got through day one. And this session is a continuation of God's creation account, the account that God wrote, that Moses edited and compiled together into the book of Genesis. And it's an account that is written by an expert scientist. As we're looking at this, saying, what is God doing as an expert scientist? And what is he telling us using simple words and describing advanced scientific details? So we finished day one. Day one, God created the spaces in the land, the raw materials he's going to use to form the universe. Told us it was not completed yet. It's formless, dark. And then God formed the light. He said, let there be light. There was light. And he separated the light and the dark. And we looked at where that light came from, likely, and what it meant to be separating the light from the dark there on day one. So at this point, we have the substances of space and land, and we have it formed enough, the land is formed enough that there is light. And now this is the whole land for the whole universe that God created. He never creates any more land. And so this land is now going to be transformed into the entire universe. And that's how we start on day two of the creation account. God said, let there be an expanse within the liquids, this liquid land, this watery land, and let it separate liquids from liquids. So we've got this land, this liquid land. And again, as Isaiah said, the best commentary on Genesis says, this is earth, this is land. And Genesis says it's liquids. So it's liquid land, and we're going to separate this, and we're going to have this huge expanse and spread it out to the size of the universe. So God told us what he's going to do first. Let there be an expanse. And then the next thing he does, and God made the expanse. It's not something he created. He made it. He used the existing materials. He separated the liquids under the expanse from the liquids above the expanse. I've got to look at these words here a little more closely. So this expanse means to stretch out, expand. And God is taking space and stretching space out. That's exactly what it says in probably a dozen other places in Scripture. God stretched out space, stretched out the heavens, stretched out the spaces, and he separated these liquids, this watery earth. So we've got two things going on. We have a stretching of space, and at the same time we have these land materials being spread out. So as he's taking this materials and spaces, stretching the spaces, spreading out the materials, and how far does he spread them out? To the size of the universe. This is the only thing that's done on day two. God is taking all these materials and spreading them out to the size of the universe. And you say, that sounds eerily like the Big Bang, and it does, and yet it is something very different. In the creation account, yes, all the materials were in one place in the very beginning. The materials for the entire universe. That's similar to the Big Bang that says all this material came out there. Now the Big Bang, they call it a hot Big Bang because it was incredibly hot. In the creation account, we don't get this sense of it being hot at all because it's not exploding out, it's being stretched out. God is doing it. God is adding the energy and spreading this out to the size of the universe. And there are numerous scriptures that say, oh, when God wants to get the attention of the Israelites to say how great he is, he uses day two of creation. Don't you know how great I am? I'm the one who stretched out space and spread out the heavens, spread out the land all by myself. This is the work of my fingers. This is what I can do. And this is all he does in day two. He's making this material and he's spreading it out, stretching out space and spreading out the material. And again, in the Big Bang, we see this took billions of years to do because of an explosion. But in the creation account, it took one day because God is using his power to stretch out the heavens to the size of the universe. There's an interesting thing in science. In the Big Bang, there is called inflation theory, where it seems like, and a commonly accepted consensus is that at the beginning of the Big Bang, there was a time of inflation when things traveled away from each other far faster than the speed of light. And it turns out, which I've done, if you take the speed that they calculate it was going at the beginning there, and run that speed for 24 hours, you'd get something very similar to the size of the universe today, the whole universe. Things went very fast. Now, they say that was only for a small fraction of a second, and then it slowed down. But they also say it's continuing to accelerate today. And so it went very fast, and then it slowed down, and it's accelerating. It's like, there's some things that are going on here. Now, God says things were all in one place, and he stretched it out in one day. Made the expanse, separated the liquids, the watery earth, the watery land under the expanse from liquids above the expanse. Now, this under the expanse and above the expanse, those are fascinating words, because we know today that earth is a sphere, a globe, and yet God can't use those words of a globe because people would not understand this. So he used the word land, they understand that word. But this phrase, under the expanse, I think that's the phrase he uses to talk about planet Earth, because planet Earth is under this expanse of space. And everywhere we look on Earth, we look up. And when we look up to the things above, we see the expanse. So, this is three words that perfectly describe planet Earth accurately, which God knew there was, and yet he's describing this to people who have no understanding of that. And it was as designed. God had a plan. And it turns out that when he completed his work, it was exactly as he had designed it. Then we have this second day of definition, actually the third definition. He defined light as the period of, or day as a period of light and dark as a period of dark. And now he's defining spaces as the expanse. And this is very interesting because space is something he created on day one. Spaces. And now he's taking this thing he created on day one, that substance, and defining it as expansive because that is the most common meaning of the word space. When we look at space, we look out there, we see the huge vastness. Now there's stars in it, but what we see is the huge vastness, the expanse of space. And so God is saying not only is space something that he created on day one, but that word has two meanings. He's now defining it as the stretched out space, which is the expanse. And to help us understand from here on out through the rest of this chapter, he does not use that word space by itself or the word expanse by itself, but he calls it the expanse of space through the rest of it. He uses both those, even though he defines space as the expanse, he's now going to use both those words together so we understand that this is the expanse of space that we're looking at when we see this big size here. There was evening and there was morning, a second day. So the only thing that God did on the second day, which is perhaps the greatest day of creation, is he expanded the universe to the size, the vast size it is today, and it is extraordinarily vast. Then we begin day 3, and he takes his focus now and begins to work on planet Earth, and there's something that might begin to recognize as planet Earth here. God said, let the fluids under the spaces, oh yes, under the spaces, under the heavens, that's the area, that's the phrase God is using to describe planet Earth, be collected into one place and let dry ground appear. And you can see something in this picture is like, oh yes, now there's dry ground appearing, which of course means that there's the watery part is becoming separate. And you say, but that's the wrong continents and that's the wrong colors. And like, well, no, it's probably the colors at this point were not green because there are no plants yet. And the continents are probably not shaped the way we know them today because the flood is going to change the continents dramatically. So we have something that would look something like this. We have these blobs of material that have been collected and they're into one place, and now let some of it become more solid and firm. And it was as designed. God completed it just exactly as he had planned. The last two definitions that God gives us, God defined land as the dry ground. That's the obvious definition of land. It's the dry ground. And that's the land that he created. This is the word. It's like, oh, this when he created the land. But that land wasn't exactly like this land. It was formless at that point. Now it's very formed. And seas is the gathered liquids or the gathered waters. Oh yes, now this water is something we would recognize as water because it's in seas. The water in the beginning was fluidy, not even necessarily muddy, but it was a fluid earth. And God saw that it was good. Whenever he sees it's good, it's completed. No need to change it. This is now a place that he can work on and complete. Now he's still not done with day 3. He's going to go on day 3. God said, let the land sprout grass, plants with seeds, and trees with fruit and seeds, each seed reproducing its own family on the land. And it was as designed. He told it what to do, and the land responded with grass, plants with seeds, and trees with fruit and seeds, each seed reproducing its own family. And God is making this interesting thing that seeds reproduce their own family. Now, your translation would have said kind, and kind is a good word there, and yet it's not a word used in modern science. Most likely, the taxonomical level that God has produced here is family, not species, but family. And we'll look at that again a little bit later here. God saw it was good. Just exactly the way it needed to be. It was evening. Again, it was dark first, because he created the darkness, then formed the light. Then there was morning, a third day. So now we have 3 days completed at this point. We have all the materials created, all the materials stretched out to the size of the universe on day 2, and he's focused on planet Earth and formed that on day 3. Go to day 4. God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the spaces." Again, God defined spaces as the expanse, and I was using those words together. The expanse of the spaces. Let there be lights in the expanse of the separate spaces to separate the day and the night. Let them be for signs, seasons, days, and years. And God gives a purpose to these stars and the sun and the moon for signs, seasons, days, and years. And we use stars and their positions to know the season. Obviously, the day is the sun rising and setting, and years when we come around to the seasons again. They're also signs. God set them, and he's going to use them for signs to tell us when he's going to do something unusual. He's going to put a sign up there and tell us that something unexpected is looking like it's taking place. And that was one of the purposes he gave to stars. And it was as designed. God made the 2 great lights, again, not created, made here, bara, form and fashion out of existing material. He uses this land that he spread out. How far did he spread it out? To the ends of the universe. He's using this land that he spread out, and he's made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the sun, the lesser light, the moon, to rule the night, and the stars. These are all things that God made, not created out of nothing, because he has the material out there now. God set them in the expanse of the spaces, again using those 2 words together, the expanse of the spaces, to give light on the land, to rule over the day and the night, and to separate the periods of light and dark. God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a 4th day. So we have the 4th day is the exterior, outer space, all the sun, moon, and stars are done. Now we have on here plants and the whole realm of the universe, but there's no animal life. And God's going to do something a little different when it comes to animal life. Begins that on day 5. God said, "Let the waters abound with an abundance of life." It's going to begin with sea creatures, but he's also going to do at the same time, "And let birds fly above the land across the surfaces of the expansive space." Again, we have this expansive space, and where are birds? Oh, they're in the surface of the expansive space. How far does the expansive space go? Out to the farthest, remotest area of space. Birds are flying across the surface of the expanse of the spaces. So he's got a plan. This is what he's going to do. And then he creates. This is the second time the word create has been used. Out of nothing, create sea creatures. And every living thing that's stirring and swarming in the waters in their families, and every winged bird in its family. A couple things we need to note here is God used the word create. Now we're going to see in the next section on the Adam's account of creation that he makes it plain that God made the animals' bodies out of the land, out of the dirt, out of the soil, the ground. And that's very true. He did make them, but they're not just made. He also created them. What that tells us is that animals have something in them other than just physical. They have some sort of a soul, some sort of thing. Plants did not have this. Plants are just highly organized land materials. But animals, God created. And so they have a body that's made out of the land, but they also have something in them that's created more than just physical. Now this is where a huge difference between evolution and the Bible exists. As an evolution, you have the physical, and that can change and evolve and expand, but it never gets something new created in it beyond the physical. And we'll also have another session in time that says that's a big problem, because if everything is physical and just physical, the physical universe is entirely cause and effect. There's no such thing as a choice or a free will or the ability to make a decision that's really a decision that's unbiased. Everything is cause and effect in the physical world, and you can't change that. God is saying, no, I have a physical world, but it's more than just physical world. I'm giving these animals the ability to do some things, to make some choices that are beyond just cause and effect. God saw it was good. No need to change this. God blessed them. God blessed the animals. God blessed the animals. It's because they have something created in them that is more than just the physical land of their bodies. They have something created in them. God blessed them, saying, and God's blessing to animals is, be fruitful and increase. Fill the waters of the seas and let birds increase on the land. That's God's blessing, but it's also his command to animals. They want to fill every environment on the whole globe. Every environment. Fill them. Increase. And as these kinds, these families, to do this, God has likely programmed their DNA so that they're able to adapt to different environments. And that's today what we likely see as evolution, is God's ability to pre-program this DNA to respond. We'll talk some more about that. There was evening and there's morning, a fifth day. So the fifth day we see the sea creatures and the birds formed out of the land, and then something God creates in them, something more than just the physical. Day 6, God said, let the land bring forth life in their families, domestic animals, creeping things, and beasts of the land in their families. And it was as designed, exactly as God had planned. God made, formed and fashioned out of the land, the beasts of the land in their families, and domestic animals in their families, and ground creeping things in families. And God thought it was good. He likely also gave them the thing he created, that life that he had created in the sea and birds, creatures. So we have the land animals, and there's good. And oh, by the way, can you see some land animals there that you don't see around today, like the tyrannosaur there, or those birds flying up there? That some of those have come extinct. But God made them all in the beginning. Then God said, let us make man in our image and likeness. Let them oversee the fish of the sea, birds of the spaces, the domestic animals, all the land, and every creeping thing on the land. And so God gives humans with a purpose to oversee his creation, to be managers, to assist it, to improve, to work with it so that it is all that it is supposed to be. And he made man in his image and likeness. So humans again are made out of existing materials out of the land, but we're going to see also humans are created, because the very next verse said, then God created man. And this is the third creation. So humans have in them something now that animals don't have. Likely something to do with the image and likeness of God. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. This we're going to have to come back to in the subject on Genesis 2, because there's much more in depth here. We're going to save that till we look at the issue of marriage in Genesis chapter 2. God blessed the humans. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase. Fill the land. Cultivate it. Oversee the fish of the sea, the birds of the spaces, and every living creature that moves on the land. God blessed humans, and he gave them the job of filling the land, cultivating it, being a farmer, being a gardener, and overseeing the fish, the birds, every living creature, to have pets, to have animals, That's part of God's blessing that he gave to humans, is to oversee the land and all the creatures in it. And then God said something very special. He's going to provide for us. God said, see, I have given you every plant producing seeds that is on the surface of all the land, and every tree whose fruit is seeds, you shall have them for food. God has provided food for humans. But not only there, he also gives food to all the animals. And every animal of the land, and every bird of the spaces, and everything that creeps on the land, everything with the breath of life, the thing that God created in these animals, I have given every green plant for food. And it was as designed, exactly as God had planned it. God observed everything he had made, and it was excellent. There was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the spaces, the land, and everything filling them were finished. And here we have at the end of day 6, everything is finished and completed. Everything in the spaces, land, and everything filling them. Because now we can do a problem. Because the next verse says, God finished on the 7th day the work he did. Didn't we just read everything was finished on the 6th day? And now we read God finished on the 7th day. The 7th day has a number of problems that we need to resolve in it. It's like God is intentionally writing this in and saying, you should notice that there's a problem here, and I want you to think about it, because it's a very important issue. I think whenever God presents a problem in Scripture, this is because he wants us to see and think about it and meditate on this. And here's the first problem. We've just read everything was finished on day 6, and then it's the next verse says God finished on the 7th day the work he did. How can that be? And then it says, and he rested on the 7th day from all the work he did. And that's actually an issue too, because does God need to rest and sleep and take a nap? Was he exhausted from all his work? We're going to look at that again. God blessed the 7th day and set it apart, because on it he rested from all his work, all he had created for to make. I really like this last phrase because it helps us to see exactly what he'd done. This is a very literal translation of the Hebrew. All he had created for to make. He created the raw materials. First, the raw materials were the spaces and the land, and he made most of the things out of it. He made the earth, he made the stars, he made plants, he made land animals, sea animals, birds. He made those things, but then he created some things. And so, for example, like the life he created in us, I think he's still working and making that into who he wants today. God is still working today in your life and my life and making us into what he wants us to become. So there's several problems in this. Here's the first problem with day 7. It never says there was evening and there was morning the 7th day. That's a huge omission. Why in the world did God say that every day, evening, morning, first day, one day, evening, morning, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, and then stop? It never says there was evening and the morning a 7th day. Why not? That's a huge problem. Then God rested on the 7th day. Was God tired, weary, or out of breath? Well, listen to what Isaiah says about that. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is an eternal God, the creator of the whole earth. He does not get tired or weary. There's no limit to his wisdom. He gives strength to those who are tired. To the ones who are lacking power, he gives renewed energy. God gives energy to those who are tired. He does not get weary or tired. He does not need to sleep, take a nap, catch his breath, sit down. He doesn't need that. He does not get tired. And yet it says God rested on the 7th day. How do we resolve this issue? Then the third issue was the first one we actually talked about. Which day did God finish? Because it says there was evening and morning the 6th day. Thus the space and land and everything filling them were finished. And the very next verse then says, God finished on the seventh day his work that he did, and he rested on the seventh day from his work that he did. So did he finish on day 6 or did he finish on day 7? Because it says both. I think we need to resolve these things. I think God put these issues there with a very intentional purpose to say, hey guys, wake up. If you've been asleep, look at these things and say, this doesn't make sense. But they do. But they only make sense when you think about them and say, what are you saying here, God? What's the difference between a rest and a pause? There's some ways they're very similar meanings. If you pause, you've rested. And I think rest focuses on catching your breath, sleeping. That's not something God did. Pause focuses on a brief stop and then continuing. And I think pause might actually be a better translation of this word rest here, because rest involves sleep and taking a nap and sitting down and catching your breath. That's not what God did. He paused. So we're going to look at this. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, Mary went, Mary went. Everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. And what is this in the middle here? That is a rest. And did I go to sleep there? Did I need to stop? I did catch my breath, but a very brief breath. It's a pause. I think this is the kind of rest that the creation is talking about. He paused. And look how this pause fits in with the rest of the things that he's describing that were problems on day 7. There was a pause on day 7. Think with me again, when Jesus came to earth, he had some problems with people. And the number one problem that I think caused him more than anything else was that Jesus worked on the Sabbath, which is the day of rest. For example, here in John chapter 5, and this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus. Why was he getting his problems? Because he was doing these things on the Sabbath, the seventh day, the day of rest. But Jesus answered them, my Father is working until now, and I am working. God completed the creation on day 6 and day 7. But he paused his work. He's been working ever since then. He's been working in your life and my life, in the life of all of our ancestors. He's been working on earth to accomplish his will. He is not done. He is still working on day 8, day 9, day 10. So what about day 7? Why did he pause from his work on day 7? And it's like, and then again, why did he not say there was evening and morning the seventh day? So the question is, was God completely done creating on day 6? Well, what it says is the spaces, the land, and everything filling them were done. Were the spaces, land, and everything filling them done? Absolutely. They were finished. Absolutely done. Is that everything? Is there anything else that God ever created? Well, he said he's going to create a new heavens and earth. Yes, that's still future yet. There's one other thing, and it's a very, very important thing. And I think God was not ready to do this on the first day 7, and so he paused and did it on a later day 7. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. The new has come. A new creation? Was God completely done with creation by the end of day 6? Had he created this new creation in Christ by the end of day 6? No. That took his finished work on the cross when he said, it is finished. And his shed blood, and he made the way for us to become children of God. that new creation wasn't done until Jesus presented his blood to the Father, likely on the Sabbath day, because he died just as the Sabbath was beginning. God paused. God finished on the seventh day the work that he did, and he paused on the seventh day from all his work. God blessed the seventh day and set it apart, because on it he paused from his work, all he had created for to make. Now there are several translations or commentaries that will fix this another way and say, they read verse at the end of day 6, say God finished on day 6, and then they read this, God finished on the seventh day, and they say, oh, well, he can't finish on 6 and 7, so they say God finished by the seventh day, or before the seventh day, and they say change the on to by or before. The problem with that is the next phrase is clearly parallel, and he paused on the seventh day. And if you change that on the seventh day of the first, you really should change it in the second. And he paused before the seventh day, and he paused by the seventh day. That's not right. No, God paused on the seventh day because he's setting it apart. That day, and he's setting it apart because he has one more thing to do yet, and he has to pause. And that's likely why it says it's missing. There was evening and morning the seventh day, because that was not the seventh day that God was doing this. That seventh day came later. It was still a seventh day, but he paused, came back later. And then we have the Toledoth that Moses cites God as the source. This is the account of the spaces in the land when they were created, in the day when Yahweh God made the land and the spaces. And all of a sudden we have this interesting thing. First of all, God's been called God all the way through here, and now he's called Yahweh God, the Lord God. And this is a chiasm or chiasm, some will say chiasm, because it's in the shape of X. Notice how the parallel lines, the spaces, this is the account of the spaces, and how does it end? And the spaces. The second thing, and the land, and how does it end? The land. When they were created, when Yahweh God made. There's parallel lines here, and this chiasm is showing this is a little poetry, Hebrew poetry, and Moses is likely writing this saying, this is my citation of the account, the Toledoth, that God wrote in the day that he did this. And now in the day there, that day is written by Moses, is not the same day as God is using, where day is a period of light. And this is in the day where it's the period of time that God was doing this thing, that all 7 days. God made and created, and he's using these things. So this is Moses' citation. It says, this account that I got is from God, the author of all these things. That's why it is God's creation account. He is the one who wrote it. He's the one who did it, and he is the one who wrote it. And we can think, oh, we're done now. We now know the rest of the creation account. And yet I'd say, did we get the main point? Because there's something else in here that you say, let's look at these and let's analyze these things a little deeper. And there's an issue here that I don't think we've gotten yet the main point. I might ask them this, what scientific theory might disagree with the creation account? And you'd be pretty easy to answer that. That is evolution by natural selection, which takes billions of years and natural events, and God isn't involved in any of them. And did God know about evolution by natural selection, that was going to be taught? And by the way, it was taught long before Darwin. Darwin added the natural selection, but evolution has been taught by ancient religions for thousands of years. Yes, God knew about that. This article is now 2004, so it's an older article. In National Geographic, Was Darwin Wrong? Was written by a man I've had the opportunity to talk with. He lives in my town that I live in. And I think he would have rather have put the title in here, Was God Wrong? But that's very much too controversial. Was God wrong when he wrote the creation account? And so let's take it out of there. We'll put this, was Darwin wrong? And then you can answer it this way. No, the evidence for evolution is overwhelming in as large of a type of font as National Geographic would possibly allow. The evidence for evolution is overwhelming. The Bible is wrong. Or how about Stephen Jay Gould, who was a Harvard professor for 35 years, and he said this: well, evolution is a theory. It is also a fact. It is true. It's the way things happened. Or perhaps you've seen the bumper sticker, evolution is a fact, God is just a theory. Or how about this? Scientists consider evolution a proven fact. And if they consider evolution a proven fact and it's not found in Genesis, what do we do with Genesis? Do we throw it out? Do we make it comply with evolution? What do we do here? And quite frankly, people are doing a lot of different things. So one of those things is we see in the Catholic Church. The Vatican has announced it is officially on board with evolution. A leading official declared Darwin's theory of evolution was compatible with Christian faith and could even be traced to St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. In fact, what we mean by evolution is the world as created by God, said Archbishop Gianfranco Rovasi, 2009. So as of 2009, the Catholic Church is officially on board with evolution. Well, it's the Catholic Church. What about other churches? The Church of England is to apologize to Charles Darwin for its initial rejection of his theories nearly 150 years after he published his most famous work. They're finally saying, we were wrong in contradicting that. Church of England will concede in a statement that it was over-defensive and over-emotional in dismissing Darwin's ideas. It will call anti-evolutionary fervor an indictment on the church. Darwin was right, church was wrong. This book by Francis Collins, who's one of the preeminent scientists of our time, head of the National Institutes of Health, and was the head of the Human Genome Project that mapped out the DNA for humans. A scientist presents evidence for belief, the language of God, speaking of DNA. And here's what Francis Collins says, quote, I'd like to suggest that science should not be denied by the believer. It should be embraced. The elegance behind life's complexity is indeed reason for awe and for belief in God. And he's right. Science is a wonderful thing. It needs to be embraced. It is a great thing. But you notice that's not the end of his quote. He goes on to say, but not in the simple, straightforward way that many found so compelling before Darwin came along. And I have to ask, what is that simple, straightforward way that many found compelling? That's the biblical creation account. Darwin was more right than the biblical creation account, he is saying. Or how about this book by Dennis Alexander, Creation or Evolution, Do We Have to Choose? Can't we just make them both fit in there? Dennis Alexander is both an eminent scientist who finds the evidence for evolution overwhelming and a Christian who believes the Bible is God's authoritative word for all people, as said by Andrew Hallstrap. So can we merge the two? Can we merge creation and evolution in a way that both are true? So the question is, if the Bible is God's authoritative word, and if evolution is a fact, then did God use evolution to create? I think that's a fair question to ask, as long as we ask it to God and don't force it on him. God, did you use evolution to create? And of course, we're going to answer that. Where would we look? We'd look in the creation account and say, God, are there evidences in here in this creation account that you used evolution? Let's ask that question. To do that, we have to know a little bit about evolution. And there are 5 fundamental tenets of evolution. 5 issues that all are essential for evolution to take place. You have to have all 5 of these things for real evolution to happen. And they are all an advancement through death. When one species or group of species die off, then it makes room for a new advancement. Here's the 5. The number 1 thing is there's nothing supernatural. Again, as we mentioned in the first session, this is naturalistic science. They cannot use the word God. And so in this evolution, there can be nothing supernatural. if it's going to be science, it cannot be anything supernatural. Natural laws guide the process. No designer, no plan. Number one tenet of evolution. Nothing supernatural. The second is that random events happen. Things happen. The cause and effect of this universe cause various events to happen. Random, unsupervised events occur that affect the genetic makeup of individual organisms. Each organism requires new combinations of DNA from its parents, and unique mutations also occur. You get some things that neither your mother or father had. Most mutations are harmful, but some can provide survival benefits. So we've got these unsupervised things that just happen, and you get some good things and some bad things. You get some mutations, and they might be harmful and they might be good, and that's what happens. Now we have number three, the heart and core of evolution, that is natural selection. Through the process of survival of the fittest, that is natural selection, organisms with advantageous traits tend to survive, proliferate, and pass on their advantageous genetic changes to a large population. Number four, this takes a long, long time. You have to have generation after generation over very long periods of time. Multiple advantageous traits accumulate in a certain population. And then finally, number five, eventually, the sum of all of the changes has modified a given population so much that it becomes a different species, different family, different genus from the original one. And we have something that is new, at least new species, and obviously in the big picture, new families, new genera, all sorts of things. This little guy is pretty excited. How many more generations do I have to wait till this is happening? And I can be truly as advanced as humans are. So now we look, is that what the creation account says? Does it teach that God used creation? Well, it turns out that the creation account emphasizes 5 areas by repetition. There are 5 fundamental tenets of evolution. There are 5 areas that are emphasized by repetition in the creation account. I think we should look. What does the creation account emphasize by repetition? Here's those 5. First one, God said, this is what I want it to be, this is my design, this is my plan, and it was so. He said that 8 times in the creation account. God said, and it was exactly as he designed it. Second one, God created, God made, God divided, God saw, God called, God set. God in an active verb. Over 25 times in the creation account, God is involved in these events. It was good, it was good, it was very good. 7 times the creation account mentions good, completed, doesn't need to be changed at all. It's good. Evening and morning one day, evening, morning, second day, said 6 times. Again, the 7th time, it's not there, but it does mention 6 times. Evening and morning, one day, second day, third day. And day is even a word that's defined. The final one is after its kind, after its kind, after its kind, or after its family, as in my translation, after its family. And that's in there 10 times. Everything had offspring of the same kind. And that seems strange. Don't turtles always lay turtle eggs that turn into turtles, and walnut trees have walnuts that turn into walnut trees? Isn't it obvious that everything has offspring after its kind? Why say that 10 times? Now let's look at the 5 fundamental tenets of evolution and the 5 areas emphasized by repetition in the creation account. And I think you see something that's going to be fascinating here. Creation account said God said, this is what I'm going to do. He told us his plan, and then he did it. Evolution says, there's no designer, no plan, no one in charge of these events. Same issue, but totally different answers. Look at the second one. God created, God made, God divided, God set. Every thing going on in the creation account, he was directly involved with it. Fundamental tenet of evolution. Random events happen. There is no person doing these things. It's random events are in charge of everything. In creation account, God is in charge of everything. Same issue, totally different answer. Everything was good. It was good. It was good. It was very good right from the start. What is the central tenet of evolution? Natural selection. Everything is getting better and better and better. And if you run that backwards, if everything is always getting better and better, what were things at the start? Not very good. Same issue, totally different answers. Number 4, 6 days. And God defined the word day as a single period of light. 6 days of creation, 1 day of rest. Tenet of evolution is, if you're going to have natural events cause these things, there's no way it can happen in less than billions of years. It absolutely requires billions of years. God said, no, did it all in 6 days. That's his power. Finally, always offspring after the same kind, the same family. Tenet of evolution is, no, eventually offspring of a different kind, a different family, a different genera, a different genus. And again, the same issue, totally different answers. There are the 5 fundamental tenets of evolution. Those are the 5 things that must happen for evolution. There are the 5 things that are repeated to emphasize in the creation account. And they're the same issues as each 5. But God came completely different answers. Oh yes, and then God finished his creation and rested. When did evolution end? Evolution never stops. It's never finished. If I were to say what is the main point of Genesis 1, it is a polemic against evolution. A polemic is a strong argument against. I think God knew evolution was going to happen and said, I'm going to write my creation account specifically and detailed enough that if you look at it closely, you'll see I did not use evolution. God says, I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand and I will accomplish all my purpose. God knows the end from the beginning. So we ask this question, did God use evolution to create? And the answer is no. God says no, very strongly. He did not use evolution to create. Now, he created families, the word is kinds in yours. I think families is probably the more accurate, and it's the more taxonomical, the word we understand. And it's families because they're related by birth. And in a family, everything is related by birth. They're born into one family. So God created these families, these kinds, and then I think that's the taxonomical level of family. That's the closest. And now there aren't very many taxonomical levels of family. He created the canine, the dog kind, the feline, the cat kind, the equine, the horse kind, the bovine, the cow kind. And there's a few thousand different families of plants and animals and sea animals and birds. Just a few thousand families. Then God created various families. Then what did he tell them to do? Kinds are not species. And we know that kinds are not species, but there was a time when it was called special creation, or should I say special creation, when it said God created all the species in fixed form. That's not what it said. He created their kinds, and that's not species, and we can tell by the context it's not. Because everything reproduces after its kind, and so the offspring are always going to be the same kind as their parents. After its kind, offspring, same kind as parents. Well, look at this. If you cross a lion and a tiger, are they the same species? No. Are they the same kind? Are they the same family? Yes. And if you cross a lion and tiger, you get a liger. Now, the liger has to be the same kind as its father, has to be the same kind as its mother. So the liger is the same kind as the lion. The liger is the same kind as the tiger, which means the lion and the tiger have to be the same kind, and they are the same family. They're not the same species. And we can see instantly, oh yes, this is not species that God created. That doesn't fit the context. It fits the context if these are families. If you cross a beef cattle with a buffalo, you get a beefalo. Again, the beefalo has to be the same kind as cattle. Beefalo is the same kind as buffalo, but cattle and buffalo are not the same species, but they are the same family. Now, if you're going to cross a lion and a buffalo, you're going to get lunch. It's not going to work because they're different families. Then God blessed the animals, His blessing to animals was to fill the land and seas. And if that was his blessing, his command to fill them, did God give them the ability to fill it? Absolutely. But the ability to fill the seas and the lands in the many different environments is going to take different species. One species can't thrive in all environments. High, low altitude, hot and cold, wet and dry, windy, still, loam, sandy, rocky, clay soil. One species does not thrive in all of those. So that's why God pre-programmed the DNA to respond to this environment. Seems God pre-programmed DNA to adapt to environments. One family becomes many species. I think the best example of that is cells. If you look at your cells, every cell in your body has the exact same set of instructions, the same DNA. But you have eye cells, and kidney cells, and brain cells, and skin cells, and blood cells, and bone cells. And you have thousands of different kinds of cells, and each one is very different. And how do they get different when they have the same instructions, exactly the same instructions, because they're programmed to know that I'm in the area of the eye, and I need to be developing into this type of a rod or a cone to sense light, or I'm in the heart, and I need to be developing a muscle that can do this, or I'm in the brain, and I need very different kinds of cells, same instructions, but they were programmed to adapt to their environments. I think it's the same way that God programmed DNA to adapt so these various species can adapt out of one kind. This is God's creation account. He is the powerful God who did it. He did not use evolution, and he used science because he understands science. And he wrote about it accurately.